What is up, everyone? It's Quinn here, and in today's video, I'm going to be talking about some of the riskiest picks in the early rounds of your fantasy football drafts. Now, when I say these guys are risky, I'm not necessarily saying they're bad picks at their current ADP. Some of these guys I actually like at their price. Others I'm a little bit more iffy on, but I do think it's important when you're picking round 1, round 2, round 3, round 4. You really do want to be hitting on those early round picks. So it's important to kind of understand the risk you're taking on. Even if you're shooting for that upside, you want to be aware of what the potential downside is for those top picks. So let's just dive right into it. We're going to start off with my first risky early round pick, and it's going to be Devonte Adams. Now, it might seem kind of strange having Adams up here because from 2018 to 2022, he was just wildly consistent as a high-end wide receiver 1. His worst point per game season over that stretch was the wide receiver 6. So for a pretty solid chunk of time, he's just been a set it and forget it locked-in wide receiver 1. But I do think there are a few key factors that make him a risky pick heading into 2024. The first thing I have to point out, and it's kind of going to be a trend in this video, we're going to be looking at some older players here. And he's going to be 32 during the 2024 season. He'll turn 32 during this year. And now, I'm not saying 32 is like a death sentence. There have definitely been wide receivers who have been very productive at the age of 32. But we may have started to see some signs of him kind of starting to slip last season. He commanded targets at an incredibly high level. He was second in targets, second in target share, target rate, red zone targets. He was first in air yard share. And that's great, right? If you're telling me Devonte Adams is commanding that type of volume, I'm thinking he's giving you, like at worst, mid-tier wide receiver 1 production. Unfortunately, all that volume only resulted in 9th in targets, 15th in receiving yards, and then 11th in touchdowns. Now, you could definitely make the argument that this was a quarterback play issue, not a Devonte Adams issue. But is the quarterback play actually going to be any better this season? You're going from Jimmy G and Aiden O'Connell to now Gardner Minshew and Aiden O'Connell. Like, I'm not seeing a massive upgrade here, if there's any upgrade at all. So the question I think we have to ask ourselves is Devonte Adams going to be able to replicate that target earning ability? Even if he's not slipping, say he's the same player. The Raiders went out, they spent a premium draft pick on Brock Bowers. You have Jacoby Myers there, who had a very impressive season. So I don't think it's unrealistic to say that Devonte Adams may not be like leading or second in all those categories I mentioned early on. And he's being drafted as the wide receiver 11 on consensus ADP. So I feel like even, factoring in that he doesn't fall off, doesn't slip, if that volume's fallen off, the quarterback play is not going to be great. I feel like he's already probably like in that back end wide receiver 1 territory, but that's a pretty high price to pay for an aging wide receiver who may actually start to be slipping, especially when you have younger options who pretty much went out and matched his 2023 fantasy production. So I think there is some risk with Devonte Adams. If you think he's going to be great, he's going to bounce back, still command a lot of volume and be more efficient, I get it, right? He's been super talented, but there are definitely a few red flags here that make me a little bit nervous about drafting Devonte Adams this year. Now, the next player is going to be Derrick Henry, and I feel like the risk here for Derrick Henry seems pretty clear. He is 30 years old at a position that has a very short shelf life in the NFL, and he's not just 30 years old, he is 30 years old with a significant career workload. It's not like he's someone who's been in a committee, splitting backfields. He has had some massive workload seasons throughout his career. He has the second most touches amongst active running backs, only behind Ezekiel Elliott, who, we've seen is pretty much dust at this point, despite being a year and a half younger. Derrick Henry has played in at least 14 games in 7 of his 8 seasons, which is just insane, even when we're not taking into account the usage. Like, just for a standard running back to be that consistent is pretty rare. But like at some point, we can't bank on that. At some point, that's going to start to break down. But he's one of these guys where I think the risk is kind of fairly baked into his ADP at this point. He's being drafted as like a back-end round 2 pick according to consensus ADP, which in my opinion is pretty fair because I think if we had like a 27-year-old Derrick Henry in the same situation, a great fit with the Ravens, he would be a locked-in round 1 pick. So even though Derrick Henry does seem a little bit risky, at his price, I think this is a fair price to pay. Maybe he starts to slip, maybe he gets hurt. These are things you're kind of accepting. But if he doesn't, if he's the same guy we've seen over the last few seasons, he's going to absolutely smash at his current ADP. Now, shifting over to the tight end position, we got to talk about Travis Kelce here. and he's someone who's really getting up there in age. He's going to be turning 35 during the 2024 season. He's another guy where despite his age, he has been very, very durable. Outside of his rookie year, he has played at least 15 games in his 10 other seasons. But in 2023, we definitely may have seen some signs of him starting to slow down. You could make the argument that it was like the knee and ankle injuries that he was dealing with, but you could probably counter with those injuries are going to be more common the older he gets. He averaged 14.6 PPR points per game, which was actually still tied for the tight end one. So like when we're talking about him slowing down, he was still the best fantasy tight end to own, but it was actually his worst fantasy season since 2016. I do expect this Chiefs offense to be better. You know, they brought in new weapons, Xavier Worthy, Hollywood Brown, but that also means there's increased target competition. So even though this offense may score more, there are more mouths to feed, you know, some younger options here who could carve out big roles in this Chiefs offense. I just think that if you're drafting Kelce, you should be expecting a higher ceiling than what he showcased last season, because this is a year where you have a lot of guys who could finish as the tight end one. Guys I have in a very similar range, Sam Laporta, Mark Andrews, Trey McBride. These are guys who have shown that they could match the production that Travis Kelce had last season, but they don't have the same concerns of falling off. So if you are drafting Travis Kelce, I just think that you should be hoping he still has that like 17, 18 point per game upside, because if he's in like that 14, 15 point per game range, with his age, the injury risk, I would much rather just take a swing on the younger options, Laporta, McBride, or Andrews, who's still in his prime. You know, not a super young guy, but you're not worried about him like falling off the age cliff. And then my final player here, who I think is a somewhat risky early round pick, it's going to be Stefan Diggs. And I think there are a few factors here that make Diggs a risk. We're going to start off with his age. He'll be turning 31 during the season. Like I said with Devonte Adams, like that's not an insane age. That's not a killer for wide receivers. But when you look at the way his 2023 season kind of progressed, I think it makes it a little bit more concerning. He was really impressive through the first half of the season. First 9 games, he was averaging 21.7 PPR points per game. He completely tanked in the second half of the season, fell below 10 PPR points per game. He was at 9.8 points per game in his last 8. So that's definitely a more concerning split for an aging wide receiver. If that was like, you know, a Justin Jefferson, a Jamar Chase split, you would just say, you know, there was variance, they got unlucky, and maybe that was the case for Stefan Diggs. But when you're getting up there in age, you're at the risk of starting to fall off a little bit. That, you know, fall off in the second half is a lot more concerning, at least in my opinion. I think that even if Stefan Diggs isn't falling off, say he's just the same player we saw last year, there would still be questions about what his ceiling would look like in this Texans offense. Like, if all these dudes are healthy, Collins, Dell, Stefan Diggs, they're all out there, like, what are these guys' peak seasons? Are any of them going to be wide receiver ones, top 12 guys? I don't know if they're all playing at a super high level. I feel like the way, you know, someone breaks into like that wide receiver one territory is either they really hit in the touchdown department, there's an injury, or Stefan Diggs is just not the same dude, and then Nico Collins and Tank Dell can kind of take over here. And then also, if he were to stay with the Bills, right, and say he started to slip, his ability started to fall off a little bit, they would still be very reliant on him. They would still force feed him volume. He'd still have a solid fantasy season. If that, you know, ability is slipping here with the Texans, they already have a 1-2 punch with Collins and Dell that they can go to. They are not completely reliant on Stefan Diggs. If he's not working out, like, they're not locked in with him long term. They have other options. There's just, you know, no guarantee that he's going to be a focal point of this offense if the ability starts to fall off. So I'm probably going to be a little bit lower on Stefan Diggs than most. Personally, I have him ranked behind Tank Dell, which I don't think is going to be a consensus take. I think on pretty much every platform, Tank Dell is going to be going after him. But I'd just rather take the younger option who had a crazy impressive rookie season, has the chemistry with the quarterback, rather than taking on the risk of kind of an aging wide receiver entering a brand new situation with a ton of target competition. So those are going to be some of my, you know, riskiest early round picks that I'm looking at here. Devonte Adams, Derrick Henry, Travis Kelce, Stefan Diggs. You can probably tell when I was going through it. Devonte Adams, not super comfortable taking him as like a back-end wide receiver one, but I don't hate it. Derrick Henry, I think his price is totally fine. I think Travis Kelce, if he's going like mid back end round 3, I think it's fair. I have him and Laporta like very close together in my rankings, so I'm fine with where he's going. Then for Stefan Diggs, probably not going to have many shares of him this season. But let me know your thoughts. Do you guys agree that these are risky options? Do you have some other players you would throw in here? Would love to hear it. But thank you all for stopping by, and I will see you in the next one.